episode of Is It True, where we talk about ghosts, AI, and other supernatural things. And sometimes we explore other videos. But no long intros. If you like this, if you want to see more, you can always put recommendations in the comments. But no long intros. Let's just hop straight into what we got. We got a short one today because I have stuff to do. So we're going to do our 2 videos today. And they're going to be horror animated because I like these videos. And I know y'all like these too. So let's hop into the first video.
Hi, my name is Mike. I consider myself an adventurer, a person who explores the whole world no matter what the destination is. Although, I must tell you the truth, I'm not your typical backpacker. I have some money that I earned from an inheritance, and I worked hard to increase it. And thanks to that, I travel to all my destinations by van or by taking a flight. Don't confuse me. I used to hitchhike. But after that dark night in a small Swedish town, let's just say I'd rather be made fun of than ask for a ride anywhere again. That night, I was much younger. I had finished exploring the town, and nothing it had caught my attention. I was ready for my next destination, but to leave, I was going to need a ride. I was hitchhiking on the outskirts of the city, and to my surprise, it wasn't a car that opened the door for me. It was a bus. A bus in the middle of nowhere? It seemed a bit suspicious to me, and even more so when they let me pass for free. But when I saw the bus was full, I was no longer afraid. If there is something that characterizes small cities and towns, is their kindness.
What kind of bus we talking
Being
about?
someone from the city, maybe I wasn't used to someone doing something selfless for someone else.
Like a school bus or a city
Relaxed,
bus?
I went to a shared seat in the middle of the bus. Next to me, I met a girl who kindly let me on the window side. I told her there was no need, but she insisted, and to tell the truth, I wanted to see a bit more of the scenery, and since the girl lived here, I'm sure she was used to it. I just sat there, enjoying the ride, until I started to feel something strange. The girl next to me was staring at me.
Hard.
Her eyes were lustful, and her hand was on top of my leg. The girl approached me very suddenly. I knew that anyone else would have accepted, but I had a girlfriend and I didn't want to do something I would regret, so I pushed her away. At my action, she was surprised, but to my surprise, her smile got bigger. Before I knew it, I noticed that everyone on the bus was looking at me. Everyone had a big smile on their face.
Oh, it's a Joker
Their smile
call.
was not evil, it was more like generous.
It's a Joker
From
call.
one second to the next, everyone was talking to me in Swedish. I didn't understand what they were saying, but they all had very happy and cordial looks on their faces. I'm not going to lie to you, even though these people didn't seem to want to do anything to me, they were scary. I tried to tell them that I didn't understand them, but to no avail. These people kept talking and talking. They didn't even seem to be trying to understand me. One person made a shishing sound and everyone turned around. It was a woman in a robe. The person was very tall and imposing. She appeared to be over 6 feet tall.
Damn, that bitch
Her features
tall.
were neutral and her skin too white. Her gaze was as generous and calm as the rest of the people. But unlike them, she seemed to speak to me with more conviction and in English. Hello, young man. My name is Dahlia. I don't want you to be scared. None of us are going to hurt you. They just seem to have made a mistake. You're not from here, are you? No, I'm just an explorer. I asked for a ride back to town. This girl tried to kiss me and suddenly, everyone was talking to me. Everyone here is so weird. Is this a cult or something? Ah, cult. What an imagination you have, young man. This is not a cult or anything like that. We are just people from the church in town. We were in the middle of an atonement trip. I saw how the driver
I
invited
was
you to
like,
get
let me
in.
off at the next stop.
It seemed strange to me, but I didn't say anything, since I thought he knew you for sure. No problem. If you don't mind, I'll get out of here. Can you tell him that? Of course. I can tell him, but I won't. If you do that, you'll interrupt our journey of atonement. No one can get off once we've started. It would ruin everything.
Definitely a cult.
Oh,
Definitely in the cult.
and where does the journey end? In the
Death.
mountains, young man.
Death.
And then we'll come back. You're so innocent. No one will come back from that trip. We'll throw ourselves down the mountains. When the woman said that, I thought it was probably a joke. Maybe I misunderstood. This couldn't be happening. Was I being part of a mass suicide?
Yes, nigga.
I was desperate to get off. If the door was locked, I would go out the window. As soon as I tried to escape, the girl gave some instructions in Swedish, and before I knew it, there were about 10 people grabbing me. The people threw me to the floor, and while some were holding my hands and feet, others were caressing me. They didn't do it in a violent or sarcastic way. They just stroked my head like a mother would do to her child to calm him down. I screamed as loud as I could, but no one heard my screams. I was trapped on this bus with these people who were prepared to take their own lives and drag me down with them. In an act of desperation, I pretended to calm down, and when the people were no longer holding me so tightly, I grabbed one of the girls and put the survival knife I was carrying to her neck.
Nigga, when'd you have a knife?
The rest of the people were still smiling. They still seemed oblivious to what was happening. I made my way through the bus to the back. Some people approached me. Others just looked at me from their seats smiling. Before I knew it, one of the people sitting on the bus jumped on top of me while another held the knife. The girl I was holding hostage bit my arm, and as I screamed in pain, I could only see the girl laughing at me as if knowing that what I was doing was useless. In a last act of rebellion, I shook myself with all my strength and rammed everyone I could on my way to my window, which was the only one left open. Attentive to my movements, some passengers tried to close it, but it was stuck. I took advantage of this moment to jump out before they managed to close it, and as I was falling down a slope, I could see the people on the bus waving at me. They all had huge smiles on their faces. The person who stood out the most was the tall girl, who waved to me as if she was saying goodbye to a great friend who was going on a trip. That was the last time I saw the bus or any of its passengers.
Is it real or is it fake?
When I returned to the city and reported everything to the police, a search was made for the bus. Initially, it was not found, but after a few days of searching, they found the bus and the passengers. All were dead after having fallen to the bottom of a cliff. Because of the distance the bus was from the fall, the police noticed that this was not an accident. Many of the passengers were smiling, but others died with a look of panic on their faces. In their last moments of life, it seems that they regretted it. As for me, I never hitchhiked again, and to be honest, I never took public transportation again, even in the city. When I tell people that I climb mountains, but I'm afraid of public transportation, they all laugh. If they had gone through the same thing I did, they would be afraid too.
Big facts, big facts.
To begin with this story, I have to tell you one thing. I don't promote or support hitchhiking. I believe that riding with someone unknown or giving a lift to some stranger could lead to some serious danger, and this story will tell you exactly how dangerous it could be. While growing up, I had an aunt called Cindy. She was my father's older sister and the best person I knew. She was the most kind-hearted, gentle, and helpful person I've ever met. She believed in helping others more than anything. She was a good person who not only preached about karma, but also practiced it. She always said that if you do good, only good will come to you. Unfortunately, that wasn't true. Terrible things happen to good people. All the time. Back when I was only a teenager, I always looked up to her. She was the eldest child of a relatively poor couple. My grandparents both worked in a factory to make ends meet back in the 1980s, when my aunt, my father, and their brother were little. It was really astonishing how brilliant she was since her childhood, and how she made a good fortune for herself. And back in the 2000s, when I was a teenager, she was a proud owner of 2 photo studios. However, one of her studios was in the city we lived in, and the other was in the next town over, a 2-hour drive from ours. At least 2 or 3 days in a week, Aunt Cindy would drive back and forth between her 2 studios to make sure everything was functioning smoothly. Now, let me tell you, we live in Arizona, and this state is famous for Las Vegas and its deserts. So, the road between the 2 towns went through a desert. Although Cindy was an expert driver and she had made this trip a million times before, we used to be worried about her whenever she used to visit her other studio. She was married and had 2 kids my age. So, not only did her business need her, but so did her family. We often talked of how innocent and tender-hearted she was, and we always worried that people might take advantage of her. One afternoon, during the summer of 2005, she was making a regular trip back to town from her other studio. Now, summers in Arizona are especially hot. The temperatures are 100 degrees, and in the desert, it's batshit hot. On this trip, she was driving through the desert with her AC on full blast, when in the distance, she saw a man sitting by the road. As he noticed her car approaching him, he raised his hand and stuck his thumb out, showing the world-class sign, asking for a lift. My aunt, being her too kind self, thought it was horrible for a man to be stranded in the middle of the desert in such heat. So she stopped the car in front of him and rolled down the passenger side window.
"How may I help you, sir? Do you need anything?"
She asked the man, who had now stood up and was standing by her open window.
Yeah, actually, could you give me a ride into the city?
No, I can't.
Without thinking much, my aunt agreed.
Sure. Put your bag in the back seat and hop in.
She unlocked the car doors for the man, and he sat in the passenger side seat.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for driving me to the city.
Oh, no problem, sir. And please, call me Cindy.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm Paul.
Nice to meet you, Paul. So, why are you in the middle of the desert without a ride? I hope you don't mind me asking.
She asked him as she drove the car towards the city. They had a good 1.5-hour journey pending.
Well, I could not live in my home anymore and didn't want to live in the same town anymore, so I decided to start fresh in another. But I don't have much money. Rather, I don't have any money. And that's why I'm hitchhiking in the first place.
Nodding her head, my aunt didn't pry into Paul's personal life anymore. Instead, they spoke of several other topics for the next half hour.
What do you think about a pit stop? We grab some lunch and head back on our way.
Cindy asked Paul when they had finished almost half of their journey.
I'm good. You can go ahead and have your lunch. I don't mind waiting in the car, or maybe out of it, however you prefer.
Paul said, somewhat shyly and timidly.
You been hitchhiking, but you
Cindy,
ain't
of course,
hungry?
had a big heart and offered to buy Paul lunch and some.
But you must be hungry. You walked so much in the desert before I picked you up. I bet you must be starving. Oh, and don't worry about the money. I got you covered. My treat. Do you like hamburgers and Coke?
Paul was floored. His cheeks turned slightly red, and not from the heat. He nervously and reluctantly accepted her offer.
Well, hamburger and Coke do sound good.
We're settled then. Would you mind staying here in the car while I get us some food?
Sure. I'll wait for you in here.
Now, a normal person would say that it was her biggest mistake leaving her car with a stranger. But Cindy believed in good deeds and walked off towards the diner to grab him lunch. She not only bought a hamburger and Coke for Paul, but also packed some sandwiches and a few bottles of water for later, as she knew he had no money for food. When she walked out of the diner, her car was still there, and Paul was patiently waiting for her in it. When she gave him his order and the extra food, Paul was almost near tears. He accepted it and thanked her for it throughout the rest of their journey.
It means a lot, Cindy. This is the first good thing someone has done for me in a long while. I really appreciate it.
Oh, don't worry. I just don't want you to sleep hungry. I believe everyone deserves a second chance. And if you wish to start fresh, I'm just helping you in a small way.
Soon they reached the town, and Paul asked her to drop him off downtown, not far from my aunt's home.
I hope everything turns out as you want it to, Paul.
Cindy told him as he was getting out of her car. Thanks, Cindy. And I hope so. You're very kind. Also, could you please give me your number? I'd like to call you up and tell you, if I make it. Without a second thought, Cindy handed him a sheet of paper with her number on it.
No.
Here you
Couldn't
go,
be me.
and I would
Couldn't be
love to
me.
hear from you sometime.
Couldn't
With
be
that,
me. Some
they both
people
parted
are too
ways.
Nice.
Now, you may think this was the most wholesome hitchhiking story ever, but the true twist comes ahead. A few days later, Cindy got a phone call from an unknown number. She picked it up, and
Hello?
before she could speak a word more or inquire who it was, the person on the other end. Hey, Cindy. It's me, Paul. You gave me a lift last week. I hope you remember me. Now, I know you didn't expect to get a call from me so soon, but for last week, I couldn't stop thinking about you. You have no idea what you've done. I was at my lowest when you picked me up in that desert. I had totally planned to get into your car, rape you, murder you, then dump your body in the desert for the vultures to eat. Then steal your car and get to the city. But instead, I met you, and you were so kind to me that I couldn't go through with my plan. I felt so ashamed of myself. I just couldn't do it to a kind and generous soul like yours.
See, this is why
If you were
don't
so
pick
nice
up
to me,
strangers.
I assume you're a lovely mother and wife, as you told me during our ride that you have kids and are married. I couldn't take you away from your family for my selfishness. And then you bought me lunch. My own family hasn't bought me anything in years. I was moved to tears by your kindness. And I didn't want to live in the city. I was looking for a fresh start because I had murdered a man just a couple of hours ago in that town, and I was on the run. But meeting you made me want to be nice. Buy someone lunch today. It's a long way for me, but I'm willing to try. Thank you once again, and I will not contact you after this ever again. Have a happy life. And Paul hung up the phone. Cindy couldn't believe what she had heard.
That's fucked
But
up.
a couple of days later, when she was back at her other studio, she heard the news about a murder and the suspect turning himself in. This story taught me both the power of kindness and to never
Exactly.
let anyone hitchhike in your vehicle.
Hey,
I always stay away from hitchhikers, and so should you.
being nice does pay off. But you never know. You never know what's going on with somebody else. You never know. But hey, appreciate the hurt. This is true. So he asked if it's true. This is a crazy story. Let's go to the one that I wanted to watch with you. 3 true scary apartment horror stories. Hopefully they're ghosts.
I'll be honest, I never believed in the paranormal. I always believed that paranormal videos were made by people pulling strings behind the camera, Photoshop or video editing. I always said I would believe in the paranormal if I saw something that convinced me. I never thought I would regret anything so much in my life. It all started when my daughter moved into my apartment. I had recently moved out as I had separated from my wife and she had taken the house. She was on vacation, so I was going to take care of Amy for 2 weeks. Amy and I had always been very close, and we were both looking forward to spending this time together. It was going to be a great 2 weeks with just the two of us together. I never imagined there would be 3 of us. The first 2 days, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But on the 3rd day, Amy was behaving strangely. She was playing and talking to someone in her room. When I went over to ask her who she was talking to, she told me she was playing with Vincent. I never imagined her as the type of girl who would have an imaginary friend, but it's not something that bothered me. I let her keep playing. What's the worst that could happen? As the days went by, Amy became more and more distant from me. She didn't treat me badly or seem angry, But she was very distracted by her imaginary friend. She spent all day talking to Vincent, so much that I was starting to worry, and that worry would grow even more when it was time to eat. Amy asked me to put 3 plates on the table instead of 2, and I hesitantly agreed. She also asked me to cook something else, since Vincent didn't like macaroni and cheese, and that's when I decided to draw the line. I told Amy that Vincent had to eat what I had known. But just so I wouldn't be too cruel to her, I served her imaginary friend a plate of food. I went to get the drink from the fridge, but suddenly, a plate full of macaroni flew next to me, smashing into the wall next to the fridge. When I turned around, furious, I saw that Vincent's plate was gone. I got very angry with Amy, but she told me that she had nothing to do with what happened, that it was Vincent. Angry, she challenged her imaginary friend, which made me even angrier. Despite my anger, I decided not to say anything to her. I would have a talk with her, but since she had been with me so long ago, I preferred to be more permissive. The next day was Friday, and I had promised Amy that I would take her to the video games during the night. I went shopping for just a few minutes. She was taking a nap and could definitely take care of herself for a few minutes. When I came back, I couldn't believe what I saw. The kitchen was destroyed. All the dishes were destroyed. The chairs on the floor and the cutlery scattered everywhere. Furious, I yelled for the first time to Amy. She again told me it wasn't her fault. It was her imaginary friend. I was furious and sent her to bed without going to the games. She, between furious and sad, locked herself in her room to cry. Minutes later, I felt really bad about what I had done. I had never yelled at Amy like that, and I didn't want to start right now. I was thinking about going to her room and forgiving her. I was sure she had learned her lesson. Before going to her, I checked the security cameras in the kitchen. It's not that if I doubted the imaginary friend was true, I just wanted to show the footage to Amy so she would understand not to lie to me. What I didn't know was that she really wasn't lying to me. As I watched the footage, I didn't see Amy. The kitchen was destroying itself. It was as if something invisible was taking out my entire kitchen, destroying it bit by bit with indescribable force. I ran to the kitchen. I needed to see everything again. As I did, I realized that this could not have been Amy's doing. The chairs were broken, and some of the dishes from very high places were on the floor. There's no way Amy could have gotten there, not even by climbing on a chair. As I was going through everything, I found a strange photo on the floor, and I bent down to pick it up. In that photo was a terrified. Next to him, there was a frightened-looking woman, and in the middle, a little boy. A frightened little boy. Behind the photo, someone had written something by hand. Family photo, Alfonso, Maria, and Vincent. Could it be that child was Vincent? I went to Amy's room and showed her the photo without telling her my suspicions. But she just spoke.
Oh, you found Vincent's picture.
It was true. That boy was Vincent.
Yeah,
This couldn't be true. There had to be a logical explanation.
It's time to move.
But that video, I had no way of denying that this was happening. Trying to understand a little more, I tried to get some information out of Amy. But I never would have expected her to tell me what she told me. Sweetie, what does your little friend want? What did he tell you?
No, but he just told me something.
Is he here with you right now?
Yes.
Hey, what's the matter? What did he say?
He said you ask a lot of questions. He said he wants to hurt you. He's saying a lot of bad words to you. He's very angry.
Tell your friend to calm down. I won't hurt him.
You should stop calling him little. I don't think he likes it. He's very, very tall.
Confused, I showed her the picture again and pointed to the child. Didn't you just say that this is Vincent? Startled, she grabbed my finger and wagged it up, pointing to the terrifying 6-foot man behind him.
No, this is Vincent.
My blood froze. Almost at the same time, I began to feel something behind me. It was air. It was a breath. Someone was breathing on the back of my neck.
Daddy, I'm scared.
All this time, the imaginary friend was real. But he wasn't a child, but a terrifying, nearly 6-foot-tall grown man. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew we had to escape from there. I ran to the door to get out of the kitchen. My daughter was standing behind him, but the door slammed in my face. Suddenly, all the stuff in the kitchen started flying at me, hurting me as I tried to force the door open. I pushed as hard as I could until I managed to break it. Amy was standing there, crying. I pulled her into my arms and ran as fast as I could. I reached the exit door, and as I reached for the key and opened the door, something behind us approached. It was like a distortion in the air that was slowly approaching us, breaking everything in its path. I managed to open the exit door and ran with my daughter. We went down the stairs without waiting for the elevator. All the lights behind us were going out. The light bulbs were breaking, and even though there was no one behind us, we heard violent and loud footsteps that were getting closer and closer. We opened the exit door and ran as fast as we could to my car. Behind us, at the apartment doors, I caught my first glimpse of a man standing in the doorway. The man had a terrifying smile and cruel red eyes. The rest of his face was sunk in a black shadow, and from one second to the next, he disappeared. That was the last time I went back to that apartment. I went to my ex-wife's house while she was on vacation and looked for a new place to move to. I hired several people to move everything out of that apartment. I never had an explanation for what was happening, but at least I had the video of what happened in the kitchen to prove that it was real. Unfortunately, no one ever believed me. With so many fake videos on the internet, I can't blame them either.
Good story, though. I'd never leave my daughter.
Back when I lived in New York, I lived in an apartment with 3 other guys. All of us were working professionals, and our home was nothing short of a bachelor's pad. However, we all made sure to keep it as clean as possible. But it was tough to always keep the place immaculate, given our busy schedules. So we all found a middle ground by sharing chores. I didn't mind doing laundry. One of the other guys, Joseph, loved to cook. That left Max with the cleaning duties. His job was to sweep and mop the apartment once in a while and wash all the utensils. Although we weren't the best of friends, we had a good relationship. We often went out for dinners and drinks, watched sports together, and always helped each other pick up the slack around the house. However, there was something unusual about this apartment. Many times when one of us was alone in the apartment, we had seen a shadow of a woman. It wasn't scary or anything, but the female shadow could be spotted in various corners from time to time. I'd always been a little scared of all such supernatural things, so I just ignored the presence for the most part. But if it was too persistent, I just went into another room. The 3 of us often discussed this entity, but Joseph and I were never too affected by this woman. However, Max often had nightmares. He used to wake up sweaty, tired, and sometimes screaming. Joseph and I tried to make him feel better, but nothing changed. Max had nightmares about this dark female entity a couple of nights every week. However, moving into a new apartment wasn't an option as our current apartment had cheap rent. We couldn't afford to move out. His dreams always included this female entity sitting on his chest and choking him. He could never see her face other than big, white eyes. I often thought he was experiencing sleep paralysis, but after visiting the doctor, it was quickly ruled out. There was one more unique thing that used to happen in our apartment. Max preferred doing the dishes either in the morning or late at night, but many times the dishes used to be washed. We all knew that none of us were doing the dishes, so we quickly deduced that probably the poltergeist was doing this. However, as the days passed, many of Max's trivial tasks around the house were complete without any one of us doing them. It soon became a standing joke in our apartment. We often commented, saying that we would love the help of the poltergeist too, but that never happened. However, as the days passed, we could see the entity affecting Max, but we were helpless. That's when Max's mother got to know about this thing. Max's mom was a unique woman. She was strong-willed and a positive person. We had met her a few times when she came to visit Max in New York. She had told Max to leave the job and come back home. Joseph and I supported this decision as Max had become borderline crazy. So instead of just being jobless at home, he started looking for a new job. Given his experience, he found a new job in Houston, his hometown. He was on a notice period in his current job. Joseph and I were helping him pack his things for the big move back home. Even though Max loved being in New York, it was best for his mental health that he returned back home, away from this entity. Only a week before his flight back to Houston, Max feels violently ill. He had a high fever and was vomiting blood. Joe and I took him to the doctor, but after doing the checkups and running tests, they found nothing. On a physical level, Max was okay, so they gave him some medication and sent him back home. However, the fever did not subside and his puking continued. He couldn't eat, let alone drink. Joe and I were trying our best, but we were seeing this dark entity more frequently than normal. She was always there, and we could see her in the corner of our eyes. We knew for sure that she was affecting Max. 2 days before his flight, Max got up yelling in the morning. But this time it wasn't a nightmare because we knew he had barely slept but for a couple of hours. He told us to turn him flat on his belly, and when we did that, we saw 3 long red scratches on his back, like a wild dog had scratched him. We knew that this wasn't a medical emergency, rather, we needed a totally different kind of help. So not knowing what to do, I called Max's mom while Joe took care of Max's wounds. Max's mom was a very religious woman. She contacted her church's priest and narrated the whole story. The priest said that the spirit belonged to a woman who had died in the apartment many years ago. She had many unfinished wishes, which she was trying to fulfill through Max. Honestly, I didn't understand much of that, but what the priest said at the end has been etched in my brain forever. He told us that in order to free Max from the grasp of the spirit, it was essential to get him out of that apartment. Not only is the spirit attached to Max, but it was attached to the apartment, too. He said it would be forced to let go of Max if he moved out. But the entity will make it very difficult for Max to leave the place. So all we have to do is get Max well enough to get on the flight.
Good storytelling.
Even though I wasn't a religious person, I prayed for those 2 days to be well. Finally, on the morning of his flight, he was okay. He still had a bit of a temperature, but he was well enough to travel. Joe and I dropped him off at the airport and left only when his flight departed. But that wasn't the worst part. The moment we returned back to the apartment, everything was destroyed. Most of the electronics were broken, and our things were either on the floor or just flat out destroyed. We didn't need to guess who had done this, but this was too much for us to take. The entity had harassed Max enough that he was forced to leave New York. Joe and I knew that now that Max was gone, one of us could be the next target of this entity, so we started to look for new apartments. In a few days, we found a new apartment, and we moved into it quickly, leaving the haunted place behind.
Where did you stay?
A few years ago, I heard that a tenant living in that apartment hung herself. She was a teenage girl, and I instantly knew what could have happened. Somehow, I feel lucky that we moved out of the apartment in time. And to date, Joe, Max, and I joke about the poltergeist that haunted our apartment.
Fake story.
We still joke about how the entity used to do Max's chores.
Good storytelling.
None of us could ever understand why, though.
It's perfect. Those were the words that came out of my mouth after I had been shown the tour of my new apartment. I was 22 at the time, and I was going to college in the city. Like most big cities, finding a good apartment seemed impossible, as I had been searching for months, and it wasn't until the last week of the 4th month that I found something I really liked. To be honest, I was shocked no one had snatched it up already. It had a spacious living room, a usable kitchen, enough bathrooms, and a perfect bedroom. I loved everything about it. Well, almost everything. The air in the apartment was a bit thick, and this was because of the numerous perfumed air fresheners that were situated all over the apartment. I didn't know why the place needed that many air fresheners, but it was the only mandatory thing that my landlord, Mr. Terrence, asked for. My opinions on my landlord, Mr. Terrence, were pretty normal. He was an awkward but quiet guy, which was a bit weird to me as he had a really huge build, so his character didn't match his appearance. As he stood in the apartment with me, Mr. Terrence looked at me and said, "So that's it, Nathan. Remember to leave the air fresheners on every day, in addition to spray a new can in the living room every morning before you leave." He then handed me a box filled with new air fresheners. The obsession with the perfumed air fresheners was a bit weird to me, but I didn't say a word, seeing as he offered this apartment to me for a very low price. To be honest, the low price was another thing that was odd to me, as the apartment was a bit on the fancier side and it clearly cost more than that. So I was really shocked when he immediately agreed to let me live there for the low rent fee that I could offer. And I could recall that during our first meeting, it really seemed like he just wanted someone to live there. But I wasn't complaining because I saw it as a huge win for me, and after settling in, I slept happily that night in my new apartment.
All I can say,
So it had been a couple of weeks since I moved into the new apartment, and while I still loved the place, I noticed a couple of strange things that were going on. For starters, I noticed that the other tenant who lived in the building actively avoided my apartment like a plague. I remember spending days wondering why they did that. At first, I thought they were just jealous of my place, but as time went by, I realized that it wasn't jealousy. These people were truly terrified of my apartment, and the look of fear on their faces every time they crossed the hall said it all. Due to this strange behavior, the only people who visited my apartment were my friends from college. On one particular day when I was coming back home, I overheard some of the tenants talking about my place, and through the course of the conversation, I heard them call it the cursed apartment. Now, I wasn't one to believe petty gossip, but I would be lying if I said the strange rumors didn't worry me. That night, I went to bed trying to get some sleep, but I kept thinking about what I heard earlier. So in order to get more comfortable, I turned in my bed to assume a better sleeping position. But as I was turning, out of the corner of my eye, I could see the silhouette of a huge man looming over me. The terrifying sight made my heart skip as I tried my best to muffle a scream. From the slight glimpse, I could tell the man was a lot bigger than me, so a direct confrontation would surely end badly for me. But I also knew that lying still and pretending to sleep wasn't a smart idea, as the intruder was bound to attack sooner or later. So I planned out the last best option in my head, and I put it into action. With no hesitation, I threw my blanket towards the intruder. Stunned that I was awake, he made an attempt to grab me, but the blanket I threw at him bought me some time, and within seconds, I ran at full speed towards my bathroom. Once I was safely inside, I locked the door and called the cops, screaming. While the cops were on their way, I listened at the door to see if the intruder was making his move, but all I heard was silence. I assumed it was a play made by the intruder to make me lower my guard, so I stayed in the bathroom till the cops arrived. When the cops arrived, they searched the apartment before letting me out of the bathroom. I was then asked a couple of questions, and I told them everything they needed to know. But after looking around and carrying out a small investigation, the cops began to doubt my claim as the head officer asked me, "Are you sure you saw someone in here? Because from the look of things, it really seems like no one apart from you was here." Confused, I said, "But I'm sure I saw someone watching me while I was sleeping. He also attempted to attack me." The officer then looked at me and said, "Well, we checked the door and there was no signs of breaking and entering." Baffled at his statement, I didn't know what else to say. As if there weren't any signs of breaking in, I didn't have any proof apart from my word. The officer saw I was having a hard time making sense of things, so he said, "Look, kid, I know you are confused right now, but I heard it's finals week, so maybe the pressures of the exam is getting to you and making you see things. Trust me, college finals can do that to a man." The other officers laughed at his joke, but I didn't. I was still in shock, and I wasn't in the mood to laugh. The cops left after a while, and they told me to be sure that there was someone before I called the next time. The week that followed after that incident was horrible, as I couldn't sleep well and I was jumping at the sound of every little thing. Soon the rumors of the apartment being cursed started to seem true to me, and I eventually couldn't take it anymore. So the next day, I went across the hall and begged my neighbor, older Lady Grace, to tell me why my apartment was the subject of many rumors and if those rumors were true. When we had settled in her apartment, she told me a morbid tale about how, for the past 12 years, all 8 tenants who have lived in my apartment had mysteriously disappeared. She said that back-to-back disappearances had caused quite a stir in the neighborhood, and people started getting anxious. But even with all the tension, it was only the people who lived in my apartment who went missing. She then said the cops had opened up numerous missing persons cases due to the rising number of grieving families, but the bodies of all 8 tenants were never found. She then added that Mr. Terrence, my landlord, was always questioned after every one of his tenants had gone missing, but he always proved he had nothing to do with it, and he always walked free. As she spoke about Mr. Terrence, I noticed she had a bit of anger in her voice, so I asked, "Hey, I know this is a bit forward, Miss Grace, but do you have anything against my landlord, Terrence?" The old woman then looked at me and said, "No, I have no problems with him, but there's something about that man. You're young, so you won't understand, but I can see things, and something isn't right with him." Her words struck me as I left her apartment. I told myself that I really didn't find anything wrong with my landlord, Terrence. Apart from the incessant use of air fresheners, he seemed like a nice man, but even then, I wasn't going to take any chances. That night, I stayed up doing research on the cases, and I found out everything that old Lady Grace said was true. So I made up my mind to move. I started making preparations to move the next day. I managed to get a place to stay as one of my friends allowed me to stay with him until I found another place. To avoid any problems, I decided not to tell Mr. Terrence that I was moving until the next morning when I was ready to leave. I can't really remember, but I'm guessing it was due to the abrupt moving process, as I forgot to put on or spray the air fresheners that morning. I spent the whole day at my friend's house, setting up my things, and after a long day's work, I went back home knowing it'd be the last night I'd spend in the strange apartment. But when I got home, a truly morbid and rancid smell filled my nostrils. It was so bad that I found it hard to breathe. I rushed to open a window or get a can of air fresheners, and the words, "So I heard you're moving," made me freeze. I slowly turned around to see who said the sentence, and standing there in the dark was my landlord, Mr. Terrence. Fear filled me as I started to stutter the words. What are you doing here, Mr. Terrence?" Totally ignoring my question, he said, "Why didn't you tell me you were moving? Were you just going to leave?" I then slowly answered him with, "I was going to tell you in the morning, Mr. Terrence." My landlord then looked at me and said, "Why are you leaving? Because of some false rumors that you heard? You'd be a fool to give up this apartment after I basically let you live here for a non-existent price." It was dark, and I couldn't see Mr. Terrence's face, but I could hear the rising anger in his voice, so I said, "You're scaring me now, Mr. Terrence, and I think you need to leave." He ignored my statement again before proceeding to say something that I wasn't expecting. As Terrence looked at me, dead in the eyes, he said in a calm voice, "Do you collect anything, Nathan?" Stunned at the totally irrelevant question, I didn't know what to say. But before I could answer the question, he said, "Well, I do. You see, Nathan, I collect these things called human beings. To be honest, I currently have 8 in my collection, and I'm looking to increase that number to 9 by the end of this year." It took me a while for my mind to register the horrifying statement that my landlord had just made. But before I could react, he lunged at me with his fist in the air. Within seconds, he was in front of me, but I managed to dodge the dangerous punch. His hand went through the drywall, and the wall pieces went flying through the air. Frustrated, he pulled his hand out of the wall, and for a split second, everything clicked as I had a horrible realization about Mr. Terrence's collectibles. It was dark, but there was no mistaking it. Staring right at me was a rotting corpse situated in the wall of my apartment. My mind started unraveling at the ghastly sight, but I didn't stop, because I knew if I didn't do something quickly, I would soon join his collection inside the walls. Mr. Terrence was free now, and as he saw my pale face, he said, "I see you've seen where I keep my wonderful collectibles. Don't worry, you'll soon make a fine addition." I rushed for the door, but I wasn't quick enough as he managed to tackle me into a table. The contents of the table spilled over as we fell to the floor struggling. I fought back with all of my strength, but it was hopeless as he was 2 times bigger than me. And it didn't take long before he had his arms wrapped around my neck. I don't know if you've ever been strangled before, but there aren't enough words to describe how painful it is. I couldn't breathe as I felt him put his whole weight down on my neck. I gasped for air as the world around me began to dim. I thrashed and struggled to look for something, anything that I could use to defend myself, and I was about to give up before I felt it. One of my hands thrashing had managed to get a hold of an air freshener can. It must have been one of the cans that fell when we collided into the table. I knew the can wasn't strong enough to knock him out, so I decided to temporarily blind him. With no hesitation, I picked up the can and sprayed it in his eyes. He screamed and reached for his eyes as he finally let go of my neck. I then struck his head with the can before rushing to the door, and as I opened it, I ran into the arms of numerous cops that had just arrived.
Numerous
I
cops?
would later find out
Wow.
Old Lady Grace had heard the noises from my apartment, so she called the cops. I don't know if it was from the fighting or the fear, but I passed out there, happy that I had survived the cursed apartment. After that incident, numerous things surrounding the apartment were revealed. Mr. Terrence was arrested, and after his apartment was searched and tore down, over 8 badly preserved corpses were found in the walls, and each and every one of them was identified as the bodies of his former tenants. After interrogations, Mr. Terrence also confessed to watching his tenants, potential victims, when they slept. He also went into details about how he got the preserved bodies into the walls, as he said he managed to do it all under the ruse of remodeling the apartment. He then finally confessed to keeping a spare key to the apartment, a key that was unknown to his residents. The families of the victims called for him to be put to death, but he was instead sentenced to life imprisonment.
Because there are
After the
details
whole
to
case
this
had been settled, I
that
moved back
don't
to the
make
suburbs
sense.
with my family.
But, it's a good
I
story.
didn't finish college as I was
Very
told
good story.
I needed time to heal from the traumatizing event. Even after all this time, the therapy still doesn't work, as there's nothing anyone can tell me to make me get over the fact that I slept in a room filled with 8 corpses for over 4 months. But on the bright side, I left the morbid experience with a lesson, as I realized that it's not only people that have stories. Places too always have a tale to tell, and those tales should be important to anyone who is deciding to live or stay in those places, because the knowledge of those tales may one day save or end your life.
Alright. We only got 2 today, but ask yourself, are these stories true or are they fake? But how good stories themselves. And they make you ask, what would you do in this situation? But we're going to come back with more of these stories. We're also going to come with the Rabbit Hole series, where we talk about conspiracies. Any conspiracies that you guys want, you can always drop it down below. Any horror stories, any type of stories, or any type of things that you want to know is true or not that we can discuss, drop it down below. But you know what's been, man? They've been signing out. Peace.